Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I really enjoyed chatting with Ron Butler of Butler Mortgages because he's really put into perspective some of the challenges that we have with the housing crisis that we've got in Mississauga and Southern Ontario today, and also the current market and the situation that we're in, where, as he's mentioned, condo sales, pre-construction condo sales are down 71%. The difference between pre-construction condo sales and resale sales are about 30%, which would suggest that those pre-construction condo sales numbers, those prices have got to come down fairly significantly. It's probably $300 to $500 a square foot, a buildable square foot, that they got to come down. On a condo, that's, $500,000. On an expensive condo, $300,000 on a $1 million condo. So it's a significant depreciation that has taken place that slowed down the market. And because these pre-construction condos are not selling, the developers aren't getting bank financing. And so therefore they're not going to get built. And, I've been hearing on the campaign that some councillors are talking about use it or lose it. Well, that's only going to make the situation worse, ironically, because if they sold 20% and they need to get to 50 or 70%, and you take away the building permit, it's only going to get worse. And so they're being naive, and they're not being, they don't understand the market if that's what they're saying. No threat from a municipal councillor that they're going to lose a building permit is going to get someone to spend $100 or $300 million before they're ready to, or more importantly, have a bank lend them money before they're ready to. So if we've got this massive decline in condominium sales, in pricing, and in building, the housing crisis is only going to get worse, because we already have this, 1.5 million extra homes that we need to build. RBC said there's 1 million people that aren't going to be able to, based on their projections, be able to buy a place to live in the next 5 years, versus the 2 million that want. 1 million won't be able to. And purpose-built rental is something that lots of developers are looking at. The federal government, the provincial government has dropped the GST on construction materials for purpose-built rental, and that's helpful. CMHC is providing very attractive financing, but that process still takes an incredible amount of time. We've talked about red tape and regulation, which, again, on the campaign trail, councillors are dismissing that as bunk, as something that is obligated for them to do based on provincial rules, and something they can't change. And yet every single analyst, appraiser, broker, StatsCan, CMHC that I've spoken with, and that you've probably read tweets and articles and other things about, big one in the Globe and Mail just this past weekend, has said that the cities that actually are smart and that find efficiencies by reducing the red tape and the regulation and the zoning and the overlapping zoning and the craziness of zoning that restricts so much of what we can build, such that they can reduce the review and approval time period from 5 to 7 years down to a far more reasoned amount of time, are going to be those cities where developers are going to go, where builder is going to happen, where people are going to want to live, because it's going to be a vibrant city with reasonable pricing. And I'm in the development business. I know some cities are conducive to not having a political oversight that gets away with the regular planning process, but a system, a process that's improved, where people actually take a look at the red tape and regulation and see what makes sense and get rid of all the stuff that doesn't make sense. Take a seat back just for a second. If it takes 2 years to actually build a building, why would it take 3 times as long to push the paper around to decide whether the building that you're going to build is appropriate? There's committee after committee after committee, study after study after study, analysis after analysis after analysis, discussion after discussion after discussion, lots of different community groups, lots of different people that oppose. And then what happens is you appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the Ontario Land Tribunal approves it, even if a whole bunch of other people have said no, which is wrong. You'd think you could actually be able to sit down with a city planner and or the community and figure out what's the right thing for the community to build, rather than having to go to this extrajudicial body for them to overrule everybody and more often than not approve the things that the developer originally wanted, because that's what the community actually needs. And why these planners and city councillors think that they are smarter and know what is best for us all than the market. which is going to tell developers, architects, planners, etc., this is what we want. You know, I've used this example before. Every architect tells me people don't actually see height, though every neighborhood group complains about height. What they care about is the at grade. They want to have a vibrant streetscape. They want to have, you know, retail stores. They want to have restaurants. They want to have things that are nice to look at. They want to have fountains. They want to have public spaces. They want to have all that at ground level. They don't care whether it's 10 or 20 or 30 stories. And when you think about it, if you have a certain amount of density and you build a short, squat, big building versus a tall, thin, slender building, that big, squat building ends up shading for a far longer time the houses that are close by, which is what they all complain about, shadow, versus the tall, thin building that would sort of more equitably share the shading for a far shorter length of time with more houses, but for all of them, a far shorter length of time. I'm building a development in Dallas right now. It's ironic. At Dallas, they actually want shade because so many kids are getting melanoma. So many people in the middle of summer actually are looking for shade. They don't want to have the bright sun all the time. So, you know, different cities have different regulations. And it's fascinating that shadow and height have become the big sort of boogeyman in Mississauga and the Greater Toronto area. When what we really should be thinking about is vibrant neighborhoods, places where people can live, where it's close to transit, where there's a great streetscape, lots of public amenities, and the density and the height that can be built at scale for an improvement of the housing crisis. I think that because of what I've just described in the market, where not only do you have this 71% decline in pre-construction condo sales, but you're going to have a huge number of people that were planning on closing the pre-construction condo sales that they bought 2 and 3 years ago and then renting them out. But they're going to have problems because they're underwater, that either the price has gone down below what they originally bought at, and or they're not going to be able to get approved by the appraiser that the bank hires to do the mortgage, and or they're not going to qualify for the mortgage because of the increase in interest rates. And they had qualified based on interest rates that were, you know, 1/3 of what they currently are a couple of years ago. I think what that's going to do is that's going to be a real sort of recirculation of not all, but a lot of those pre-construction condos that come on the market, because you're going to have assignment sales. You're going to have builders that are going to be suing the buyers that haven't been able to close. You're going to be having banks that are going to be coming in. There's going to be a huge washout in this next couple of months, if not year. You're going to probably have a whole bunch of developers that got approvals that aren't going to start building, or they're going to look at doing purpose-built rental and may or may not go ahead because they may or may not get the CMHC financing. You're going to have assignment sales. You're going to have receiverships. You're going to have suits. It's going to be a really tough market. And the housing crisis is going to get worse. And so with this overdrop, and I think it's going to have an impact on single family homes, not as much as on the condo market, but it's got to have an impact, because if all of a sudden condos are down by 1/3, why would you pay the same price for a house? And I think that, you know, we're seeing that to a certain extent in the marketplace already. And I think it may get worse. And I think that if you've got a whole bunch of condos coming in the market, one of the biggest releases of condos of all time, and yet you're going through this big shakeout, I think there's going to be some people that you know say that's actually a better economic opportunity than that house that I was thinking of, which might reduce demand for single family homes, which may mean that there's a depreciation in the housing market price, and you know people just can't afford those big mortgages that they had before. So all that is a backdrop, if I could, to this housing crisis that we've got and what we're going to have to do to build homes. And I think it comes down to a few things that are really critically important. I'm going to take a break and come back. And I've tried to set the scene with Ron Butler and my own overview of what's happened in the market, that it's bad and it's going to get worse with this 1.5 million extra homes that we need, and we're not going to build, this 1 million people that aren't going to be able to find homes, that 50% of all the people that have got mortgages are going to come due in the next 2 years at far higher interest rates. I think it's going to be a really tough market. And I think that you've got a whole bunch of city councilors and candidates in the ward in the Mississauga Mayoralty campaign that are naive and don't understand the market realities and are saying, oh, I can wave a magic wand and improve things, and or aren't going to improve anything. And given that it's bad now and going to get worse in the future, it's going to get really bad, because I think they need to take action and they've got their heads in the sand. So give me 2 minutes for some messages. I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you my program for how we solve this problem that we've got, this housing crisis that exists at the same time as we've got a market depression, if not a bust. Stay with me, everybody. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've sort of set the scene with Ron Butler of Butler Mortgages and my own sort of description of my own experience as a developer of what's happening in the marketplace today. And as you know, I'm running for mayor of Mississauga. And so I'd like to suggest a couple of things that I think could help and could dramatically help in this very tough market where we need a lot more homes, and particularly less condos are going to be built. I think number one villain is development fees. Development fees were put in place such that the idea was that growth paid for growth. And so therefore, all these new homes or new condos or new townhomes that were built would need new infrastructure, new servicing, new libraries, new police stations, new fire stations, et cetera. And so therefore, we would put on this big development fee, this tax on new home construction, and that would pay for all these services that society needed in the future. I don't think it's worked because it's a very regressive tax. It's things that all of society wants and needs. And we know we're going to grow and we know that development's going to take place. And so why is it that those new people are the only people that pay? I don't think it's fair. And it is a regressive tax because the people that pay are the young, the newcomers to Canada, the renters that want to become homeowners, et cetera. And so it's the wrong kind of way of financing this. A lot of places around the world, North America and the United States, et cetera, finance a lot of their infrastructure, water, sewage, sewers, electricity, even, police stations, et cetera, by way of financing against the future incremental property taxes. And so therefore what they do is they project out the property tax revenue they're going to get from this new development. They present value it back, and they say it comes out to $1 billion or whatever that number is. And then they borrow against that to fund the infrastructure today. And so therefore, in effect, you're borrowing against those future property taxes to pay for the infrastructure today that you need, that's going to be of use for a long period of time in the future, rather than what we do, which is we tax the people that are coming in today to build the infrastructure in the future. It's almost the exact opposite. We raise a whole bunch of money today, make housing far more expensive today than it otherwise needs to be. We put it in a bank, we keep it in this rainy day fund, and we use it over time in the future to pay for these development costs, versus the way that most people do it, which is don't tax the people today, but take the property taxes that are going to go up in the future and use that to pay back a debt that you've raised to build that infrastructure today. Tax increment financing, municipal bond financing. It's the way that most places in the United States do it. It's the way that it's allowed under provincial law. It's the way that I think we should do it. If you did that, and or what some mayors have been arguing is, let's just get more money from the provincial government. I think they're hoping a wish and a prayer on that. But, I give that to them. If they got more money from the provincial government, you could get rid of and or dramatically reduce development fees. I think if you reduce development fees down to zero on purpose-built rental up to a certain set dollar figure, and or on condos up to a certain figure. And the figure I'd use is like $400,000 to $500,000 in value for a condo, or the equivalent for a rental accommodation. I think you would get developers moving, and they would move because they want to develop and they want to make money, not because you're forcing them to build more affordable homes. You're doing it because you're reducing the development fees, you're reducing the taxes, you're giving the incentive to build. And when there's an opportunity in the market, smart people come into that market and they'll build to make a profit, and they'll build good production. The second thing I would do is I would increase the density, because the easiest way to build homes at scale is by adding a couple more floors to a building that's going to be built anyway. this fourplex idea that one of the mayoralty candidates is talking about, I've spoken to numerous different people about this, and it's really a woke attitude. There's not going to be much that's done, but it's a way of arguing that, oh, I'm doing a lot, I'm building all these fourplexes. There's not going to be a lot that's done. And if it was done at scale, it would change the complexion of our cities dramatically in a way that I don't think people want. There's a neighboring street over here where I live where, if there's a party on the street and there's 20 cars that are parked on the road, people go nuts. They go berserk. If we actually had 4 times as many residents on the street, 4 times as many cars, 4 times as wide driveways, 4 times as many fences in backyards, I think people would go crazy. It's not the Mississauga they wanted. In some places, it makes a ton of sense. In the places they're going to make use of the triplex law that's already there, it may make a lot of sense. But even the triplex law that is already there hasn't been exploited that much. And one of the reasons why is that CMHC doesn't even finance developments that are less than 5 units. They know that it is very difficult for a mom and pop type of operation where you got to get the money, you got to get the contract, you got to get the subs, you got to build it, you got to oversee it, you got to finance it, you got to then rent it out. It's a very challenging and difficult and time intensive thing to do. A granny suite, a basement apartment, things that people want to do. Doing them as of right makes a ton of sense, and doing it legally makes a ton of sense. And I agree with that completely. But quadplexes everywhere, number one, if it actually worked, I think it would be a disaster. And I don't think it's going to work, which means why argue about it forever? It's like arguing over the deck chairs in the Titanic, and it doesn't actually make a difference. But to solve the housing crisis at scale, by adding extra floors on buildings that are going to be built anyway, and making those buildings that may be uneconomic today and so therefore aren't going to go ahead economic because they've got more density, I think makes a ton of sense. So I would go to planning and I would ask them for some advice in this regard. But I think in the end, I'd probably be in the route of increasing the density for anything that's been approved by 20 or 30%. If half of those so increased density floors were built as more affordable housing, which is be 80% of market pricing. So if someone had a approval for a 40-story building, they could build 48, but 4 of those floors would have to be affordable housing. If it was a 60-story building, they could build 72, but 6 floors would have to be affordable housing. And frankly, I think, maybe even 30% increase in density might make sense. So number 1, get rid of development fees below a set dollar figure. Number 2, increase density for everything that's built. Number 3, I think that density target might even be bigger around transit nodes. So maybe it was 20% everywhere and 30% or 40% if you're within 800 meters of a major transit node. I think number 4, density on major arterials has got to change. Dundas is 1-story, sometimes 2-story. It's terrible development. I had one city planner say it's the worst example of planning and development anywhere in the world at any time in history. These strip plazas that parallel some of our major arterials. The problem is a lot of them have then been sold off in condos to different owners, and it's uneconomic to assemble them and then try to build something. In Toronto, near major transit stones, developers are buying up and assembling 6, 8, 10 homes because they know they can build 40 stories. If you actually had a density, I don't think it's going to be 40, but maybe 6 or 8 stories on major arterials like Dundas is one example, parts of Dixie. I think you'd have a lot of developers go in and assemble some of those strip plazas, and you would love the conversion that you get. You would have 6 or 8-story developments that have 1 story of retail that's really exciting, creates streetscape, and then residential above it. And it would parallel our streets and make them beautiful main streets. I don't think this is appropriate everywhere. I think like City of Toronto passed their major road strategy. I think it makes sense in some areas, but not everywhere. And so that would be the 4th leg of my housing plan. The 5th, and frankly, it's the most important one because it then helps all of the first 4 go, is far improved all-day, 2-way, frequent GO train service on the Milton-Mississauga line, and then build density around those GO train stations. I think that this line has been talked about for decades. It's not been built. It needs to be built. It makes no sense that you've got great all-day two-way go on the Lakeshore line, on the Markham line, on the Richmond Hill line, on the Barrie line, and you don't have it on the Milton Mississauga line. It was valued at an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. If you had that kind of frequency, people would love to live at Dixie and either go downtown or out to Meadowvale to work. They would love to live at Huron, Ontario, and either go downtown to Toronto to work or out of town to Meadowvale to work. By only going one way in the morning, they can only go downtown. We need to make it both ways. And frankly, I'd add a station at Cawthra where the railway crosses right at Dundas. And if you had a station at Dixie, at Cawthra, at Huron, Ontario, maybe even one at Mavis, you'd effectively have a subway on Dundas. You'd have a subway, a surface subway on Dundas. We would have the kind of transit that we've been dreaming of and wanting and pleading for a long time. And if around all those stations you built density, you built height, you built nice little urban communities, we'd have the Cooksville that we've always dreamt of. We'd have a development at Dixie and Dundas that might be sort of similar to what downtown Markham is like, or what's being built at the Vaughan Metro Center. And it would afford us a reduction in taxes because we'd have a huge additional amount of property taxes. It would give us new vibrancy. It would give us a new urban core. It would build us the city that I think that we need because of the people that are moving here and want to buy homes here. And I think it would improve our city in a multitude of ways that vibrancy brings, that more tax revenue brings, that more people brings, particularly those types of people that are the people that are going to want those high-paying, good jobs at the Airport Corporate Center, that are going to be commuting to downtown Toronto for the high-paying financial jobs. I think that it's the kind of, you think about Dixie and Dundas to downtown. It's better than getting from Yonge and Eglinton or Yonge and St. Clair, where they're building, 15 to 25,000 units. Those are the types of people that live in Mississauga today, that if we don't build a home for them, they're going to be moving to Toronto and we're going to lose them out of our population base. So that would be my program for housing. Number one, dramatic reduce development fees. If not, frankly, take them down to zero for rental, purpose-built rental, and condos below 400 or 500,000. Number two, increase density, maybe 20% everywhere, maybe 30 or 40% around major transit zones. Number three, increase density for major arterials like Dundas, and we can go through a process of thinking which are the appropriate roads. And then number four, a dramatic investment in all-day two-way go on the Milton Mississauga line. Anyway, Brian Crombie, thanks so much for joining. I'm running for mayor of Mississauga. Election day is June 10th. Check me out at briancrombie.com for any of my radio shows, or briancrombie.ca for any of my political comments. And I'm on every night, 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night.